Bore da pawb. Hello everybody. Welcome to my Wild Welsh Garden. Croeso. And a particular warm welcome, croeso cynnes iawn, to my new followers. And a really big thank you to Colette over in the west of Ireland in Bealtima Cottage for sharing my channel. It was a lovely surprise and very, very kind of you, Colette. So thanks very much. Welcome to my YouTube birthday edition of My Wild Welsh Garden. It's a year since I set out on this journey of wilding my garden. So moving from being a neat and tidy conventional gardener to an untidy wild gardener. Not an easy journey, not an easy transition at all. And it's really been all about changing my attitude, changing how I see things as being beautiful and attractive, but ultimately thinking about what's best for wildlife. So here I am at the top of the garden and looking out over a very untidy scene. The garden is very much the back end of summer. It has that sort of sinking, fading, sort of dying down feel as everything sort of sinks gradually down into autumn and then into winter. And of course, conventionally, this is the time for tidying things up, for trimming and cutting things back and just getting the garden ready for winter. And I'm not going to do that because as these plants die down, they will provide valuable habitat for all the insects and invertebrates to live over the winter. It's been a very difficult year for insects this year. So many people have been commenting on the lack of butterflies and the lack of bees. And it is official now. The results of the big butterfly count have been published. And yes, it's the worst year for butterflies on record. And I think the total number of sightings were down 40% on last year. So things are really critical for insects in the UK. I think butterflies particularly because we notice them, because they're the big, colourful, pretty things, but they're just an indicator of what's happening to insects overall. But the weather this week has actually been really good. It's been nice and warm and dry, the sun's been shining, and I'm having a sort of late surge of insects in the garden. I've seen a few butterflies and lots of hoverflies. I think it's been actually quite a good year for hoverflies, probably because their larvae, a lot of their larvae are aquatic. And some of the puddles here haven't dried out all summer, so they've had somewhere to live. So the peacock is one of those butterflies that's seen a drastic decline in its numbers since last year. It's down 82% since last year, according to the big butterfly count. And then the red admiral is very similar. The red admiral's down even more, 86%. One of the things I do to help the butterflies at this time of year is to put some fruit out because there's not much food for them. And not seeing many butterflies, to be honest, but look who's on there at the moment. It's a European hornet munching the apple. Yes. She's about 3 times the size of an ordinary wasp and really quite docile. Not bothered by me at all, really. The ordinary wasps have really enjoyed the fruit. I've put some fresh apples out and also some oranges. And there's the hornet having a drink of orange juice. On the left, as you look up the garden, there's this series of sort of vaguely terraced flower beds, and there's a mixture of native and non-native plants in here. I do try and choose plants with flowers that will be good for insects, flowers that produce plenty of pollen and nectar. But I'm also introducing more native plants because I think they'll be more suitable as larval food plants for the native insects. And what I think I will be doing over the winter is removing some of the non-native plants that really aren't very good for wildlife at all. Like there's a peony there and a little basil tree. I'm going to be taking those out, and I'm going to be adding more native plants, I hope. So one of the things I try to have in my garden is something in flower for the insects all the time. This is wild marjoram, and this has just flowered and flowered all summer. But one of the things about having native plants is that they do tend to have stopped flowering at this time of year. That's a field scabious with a dronefly, which is a sort of big hoverfly. Most of the native plants here have pretty much gone over, which is why it's a good idea to have non-native plants as well. And there's one over there, it's an aster. There is a native aster, but it's not that. I'll go a bit nearer and see if I can show you some of the insects on it. So there are bumblebees and hoverflies. And sometimes I do get butterflies on here. I had several asters in the garden, and this is the only one that survived. I do think the slugs ate them this year, because the slugs have had just the most fantastic year. So I think I'm going to try and buy some more, because the asters are very good for insects at this time of year. I think that's a buff-tailed bumblebee. And there's one down there on the right, and the other one is a common carder bumblebee. So bumblebees live in colonies. Honeybees live in colonies of thousands, and bumblebees live in colonies of hundreds. And they're started in the spring by a queen who has spent the winter, usually underground somewhere, or in sort of clumps of long grass. And so the queen emerges in the spring and starts to form a colony. And the first bees that are produced are females. They're the workers, and they do the work collecting the pollen and nectar over the summer. And then in the autumn, she starts to produce new queens and males. And the job of the males, of course, is to fertilise the new queens. And the job of the new queens, is to survive over the winter and start a new nest next year. And this is another non-native plant. This is a Japanese anemone, which is great for the insects. And then a buddleia behind. The buddleias are mostly over now, but there's just a few of the flowers hanging on. And last week I saw this very bedraggled red admiral butterfly on this buddleia. And then I saw this beautiful yellow brimstone. These aren't common at all in this garden. I've only ever seen one a few times. And here it is fluttering around with a couple of small white butterflies, just to sort of show the difference. At the side of the main path here, there's this pink sedum, which is also a really good source of pollen and nectar for the insects at this time of year. And like I said earlier, this is the time of year when the bee colonies that are still going are producing males. Some of the bees have hibernated already, but the common carder and the buff-tailed are still going in this garden. And I think these are both males. You can tell them apart by their back legs. The females have pollen baskets. They have sort of shiny back legs and pollen baskets where they collect their pollen. But the males just have hairy back legs. And I think these legs look pretty hairy, so I think these are both males. And so we go up the central path and through the rose arch. I haven't deadheaded either of these roses, and the one on this side has got these amazing rose hips, which I hope are going to be good for birds over the winter. And on this side, this little one has just flowered and flowered all summer. So we go through the rose arch, and then this is my secret garden. So this is a nice place to sit on a hot day in the shade, although we haven't had very many of those this year. It's a good place to watch the butterflies and to come and have a meal. And I've also here got my wildflower seeds, which I've been collecting and sowing. So there's all sorts here. There's wild angelica, purple toad flax, sweet Sicily, feverfew, hedge garlic, stitchwort, cow parsley, mullein. And yeah, we'll see whether they germinate over the winter. And here's an example of how my attitude has changed. In previous years, I would have cut this lavender back, at least a month ago, and yet there are still insects finding food on it. And I do believe that the birds can eat the seeds in the winter as well, so I'm leaving the lavender and I'll prune it back next spring. Along the top of the garden is a hedge. It's a native hedge. Oh, and I've just noticed there's a little sparrow sitting in there. I think it's a young one. I think it's not been fledged very long. And it's a native hedge, so the trees and the shrubs in here are things like hawthorn and blackthorn and bird cherry and wild cherry and various other things that I can't remember what they are. And the reason for that is that our native insects will lay their eggs on these trees, and they're the larval food plant of the native insects, things like moths and flies and things. So yeah, it's a double whammy really. It's good for the birds, it gives them somewhere to hide and somewhere to nest. It also provides food for them, provides berries in the winter and insects in the summer. I planted this hedge 6 years ago, and it used to have an access path along it, the idea being that I would be able to get along and trim it, keep it neat and tidy. And I did that for several years. Well, of course, I'm not doing that anymore. So I've taken the path away. I've actually planted some more native shrubs over there to make it even thicker. And then on this side is another flower bed with a mixture of native and non-native plants. And this is also where the pond is. And I have frogs here and dragonflies and damselflies, and there's newt larvae in there. Oh, in fact, there's a dragonfly. Very difficult to film a dragonfly in flight with a phone. Oh, I think, yeah, they're very quick. Let's just catch a glimpse of it. These flowers of Geranium roseanne are still providing food for the insects. So this is another view of this flower bed. Yeah, it's very messy and untidy. I haven't really done anything to it at all, but lots of insects buzzing away. And these are my vegetable patches. What can I say? They're just a total disgrace. Yeah, mixture of bad weather and the fact that I took the nets off the brassicas. I've always grown brassicas under nets, but this year, as I was wilding my garden, I took the nets away. So I think these brassicas have done a really good job of supporting the population of cabbage white butterflies and of slugs and snails, and really not a very good job at all of feeding me. So this rather smart yellow and black caterpillar is the larvae of the large white butterfly, and it's kind of telling birds not to eat it. I don't know whether it's poisonous or it just doesn't taste very nice, but those are sort of warning colours. Whereas this chap, this green caterpillar, is the larvae of the small white butterfly, and I think birds do eat that one. But those of you who've been watching my previous videos will know all about the struggles that I've been through as to what to do about these wretched caterpillars. And yes, in the end, I've just left them be, and I'll salvage what I can. So we go down the side of the vegetable patches, past another patch of raspberries. These are autumn raspberries, which haven't done very well, but I think it's the weather. The cold and the wet spoil the fruit before it ever gets a chance to ripen. And past my enormous perennial kale, which has been home to enormous numbers of butterfly caterpillars this summer. But it's also sprouting again, so I think it's obviously going to survive as a plant. Whether it's going to produce enough leaves for me to eat, I don't know. I'd be cutting it back anyway, so I'm going to cut it back and see what happens. And then I want there to be an arch here so I can get through onto the lawn. There's a hawthorn on one side and a blackthorn on the other, but the branches do droop terribly, and of course when it's wet, when it's raining, I just get soaking wet. So I'm thinking of putting a metal arch in which will support the branches and make it easier for me to get through over some stepping logs onto the lawn. So this lawn was the subject of my last video when I was cutting it and sowing it with yellow rattle, and well, the sparrows were very busy on the lawn after I did that, so I'm just hoping that they haven't eaten all the yellow rattle seed. And that yellow butterfly is a yellow brimstone. And so this is the view from the other side with my lovely summer house, which is just lovely to sit in at the end of the afternoon as it gets the last rays of the sunshine. And while I was here, I wanted to show you this. Now, I'm not sure how this is going to work because I'm actually in the summer house. But on the wall here, above my picture of Gertrude Jekyll, is a cabbage white butterfly caterpillar next to a bunch of little cocoons. which are actually the cocoons of a solitary wasp. So what's happened to this poor creature is it's been munching away on the brassicas, and a wasp has laid its eggs actually in the caterpillar, and those eggs have developed into little wasp larvae, and they've changed the caterpillar's behaviour. So instead of dropping down and pupating in the soil beneath the brassica plant, it's gone for a long walk looking for somewhere nice and dry, and climbed the wall of my summer house and ended up here, and then the little larvae of the wasp have come out and pupated. Yeah, it's pretty gruesome, but that's how it is. So talking about butterflies, there's a buddleia by the polytunnel that I've allowed to grow into a tree, and it's a really good place for seeing butterflies in the late afternoon. And a few days ago I counted 4 peacock butterflies. And then over here is my new pond. This is the pond that I made the back end of last winter, and a long grassy area which I'm going to leave long as a habitat for insects and invertebrates over the winter. This is the new pond. The old pond is in full sun all day, but this pond is in shade for part of the day. There's not an awful lot going on in it at the moment, but given that it took several years for anything to come into the old pond, I'm not really worried. I'm just going to leave it and see what happens. And crawling all over the woodshed here and along the fence is this creeper, which actually grows in from next door, and it doesn't look at all well. I mean, it would normally be beginning to lose its leaves at this time of year, but this has been really losing its leaves for a while. Yes, I'm not sure what's going on there. But here is some very healthy looking ivy, which is just buzzing with all manner of insects. There's bees, there's bumblebees and solitary bees and honeybees and flies. There's hoverflies and drone flies and ordinary flies and little wasps and all sorts of things. So then we go down the steps to the door to the woodshed, and then up to what I call the side garden, which is where the polytunnel is. Yes, I was going to say I wasn't going to come into the polytunnel because there's not a lot going on, but there's just the cheeky robin come in looking for insects. He's over there on my wildflowers, but I don't want to alarm him too much. He looks like a young one, actually. So, yes, I'll leave him in peace. So thanks for watching the video. Thanks for visiting me again in my wild Welsh garden. Hope you've enjoyed the tour. But it's not really been a tour. It's been more sort of what's going on, what's interesting in my garden at the moment. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed it and that you'll come again. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye! Hwyl fawr!